And I'd like to tell it from the perspective of Esau. I think that sometimes Esau gets the short end of the stick in this story. But I'll tell the story from Esau's perspective. I'm Esau, and I am a twin brother to Jacob. And there are no brothers, I think, in the history of time that are more different than me and my brother Jacob. I like to be outside. I could sleep outside under the stars every day of my life. I love being outside. I love hunting and fishing and just being outside. And that love of the outdoors, that has earned me the love of my father Isaac. My brother Jacob, on the other hand, completely different. He likes to stick close to home. He likes to be in the tents around where the action is and around where the women are. And because of that, he has earned the love of my mother, Rebecca, our mother, Rebecca. Now, we don't get along, because I just don't understand him, and he doesn't understand me. But it's more than that. It's from even before we were born. See, Jacob and I, our parents are Isaac and Rebecca, and our father Isaac, his parents are Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah, they're the ones that God chose out of all the world. God chose Abraham and Sarah to bless. God decided to bless one family, and from that family, blessing would overflow. So he decided on my grandparents, Abraham and Sarah, and said, you go from your land and I will give you land as far as the eye can see. And I will give you descendants that will become nations. So many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that it will be as many as the stars in the sky or sands on the seashore. You will be great. And the third part of the blessing is that God will be with them. That God will not forsake them or abandon them, but will be with them. This blessing, this threefold blessing, was handed down from Abraham and Sarah to my father Isaac. And from Isaac, it would go to Jacob or me. And so even before we were born, there was a little bit of competition built into who we are. I don't think if we were even alike that we would have had a chance to really enjoy and love each other, because right from the beginning, we were battling. It's been said that my mother, Rebecca, when she was pregnant, she got so big and it was so painful that she cried out to God and said, God, what's going on in here? And God said, you have two nations at war with one another in your womb. And God was right. Even as we were coming into the world through birth, I was first. And I was all red and hairy, and so they called me Esau, which means red or hairy. Not very creative, my parents in the naming department. So red or hairy, there I was. And then right behind me was Jacob, and he was grabbing my heel as if to pull me back in so he could be first. But he wasn't first. He was second. I did that right. He was second, and to grab my heel, it means heel grabber. Have you ever heard anybody called a heel? It's not a nice thing. And it's for good reason, because they're named after my brother, who wasn't a nice guy, at least in my perspective. My brother, the heel grabber, Jacob, means heel grabber. So I was born first, just by seconds. But in those days, to be born first meant a lot. It meant that I would inherit that blessing from Abraham to Isaac, and it would go to me, the firstborn. I would get the lion's share of all the property, all my father's possessions. I would be the ruler one day, responsible for all those people, but in charge of all those people. And God would be with me and my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That is what it means to be the firstborn. Or that's be the firstborn. That is, until that stupid day, that awful day. I have blamed Jacob for this all my life, but I now know it is my own foolishness. See, I was out hunting, and I was hunting, and I got home, and I was so hungry. Have you been that hungry where you can hardly see straight? You certainly can't think straight. And here I was, famished, hungry. And the first tent I see is my brother Jacob's, and I say, Jacob, I'm starving. Give me something to eat. That wisecracker says, why should I give you something to eat? And I said, I'm starving. Have some compassion. But Jacob doesn't have compassion, my brother of mine. He just said, well, if you want that stew so bad, if you want this bowl of lovely, savory, tasty red stew, you'll have to sell me your birthright, so that it would be as if I was the first, as if Jacob was the firstborn and Esau the second. The foolishness of youth. I said to myself, well, what good is it to have a birthright if I'm going to be dead? So, all of my father's possessions, all of this land, this promise, these people, this blessing, all of this, I sold for a bowl of soup. The soup was good, but it wasn't that good. And from then on, I couldn't trust my brother. I was so angry. I was so bitter. I despised him and that birthright with all my heart. But isn't that the case? It's often the things that we know in our heart is our own fault, our own stupidity. That's what gets us the most angry. And I needed to blame him with all of my heart. And I did. But we're brothers. We live in the same community. There's no escape. And so we grew up and moved and lived the best we can. When I was about 40 years old, I started to build a family. I took a couple wives from the local girls, and, well, they gave my mother and father a hard time, but that's women for you, right? So I'm building my house, and my parents, my mother especially doesn't like it. But my mother, I just don't know what to say. She's my mother, and yet she was part of this. She was part of the greatest heartache of my life. And that's when my father gathered me in and he said that he was getting old. Well, we all knew he was getting old. My great father, an outdoorsman, a great, wonderful leader. And now it was time for him to turn over the reins. And he said, I'm getting blind, and I can't see, and I know my days are few.